In today's world of business, communication is vital for any organization to operate efficiently, thereby creating more value, building a stronger brand, and connecting with customers better. One good conversation can shift the direction of change forever. That's why at RBL Bank, we have launched Power Conversations, a platform that aims to bring some of the best minds from the banking, financial, and fintech ecosystem.
Whenever you have a comment or something to share, please talk about what's changing and not changing. Okay, sometimes when we basically talk about tech and the new stuff, we just think everything is going to change. But there are things which change and things which don't change. What's the business model? And how do you or someone else eventually generate free cash flow? This is a bank. So, we only get paid for return of principal. Yeah. So we always look at free cash flow. And I'm hoping that as you're building companies, somebody will buy them, but ultimately they also want free cash flow out of it. So, I'll just maybe launch off, and I think what's happening and why are many people talking about it. So let me start with Kamalji. You've seen both sides of the picture, and maybe you'd like to share with us why is this so important, and why did you choose to leave the comfort and security of large consumer product companies and come to the other side?
Most exciting time to be in India right now is really what's happening in the consumer space, and it's driven by certain factors which are extremely macro but also very secular, and we see that this trend will continue for decades. I mean, this is not something which is happening. Funnily, for a 1.2 plus billion population, we have very few brands in the country. And that is, the strangest paradox that you can think of. You take any category, you take products lying in front of you, take products you consume. There are hardly any brands you can think of after the first 2 or 3 or 4 names. And that was driven by a lot of complexity in terms of how brands are built in India. Partly because the distribution was extremely complex. You go mom and pop stores, 100,000 stores, 500,000 stores. So the people like Levers, ITC, they really ruled the roost. And then how do you engage the consumer became equally complex, because you are depending on mass media, television, press advertising and all, which is expensive. So it takes time and it takes a lot of money to build brands in India. What has happened in the last, let's say, a decade, but really accelerated in the last 5-6 years, is 2 factors. One is the consumer is changing dramatically. So the whole millennials, as we call them, I mean, Rajiv already alluded to our age, but thankfully 65% of the country is below 25 years of age. They are aware, they are socially connected, they understand what is happening in the world, and they are, in some sense, the word we use sometimes is entitled. A very large portion of this consumer is grown in a very stable and high growth economic time. So they are looking for new products, new ideas, and new concepts which don't exist. And just because you represent a brand from Unilever or you represent a brand from Nestle does not make it my preferred choice. On the other side, we have this entire new world of the digital economy which has opened up, which allows you to engage the consumer, social media, influencers, and so on, and also the distribution channels, which what we typically like to call them is our live laboratories. I mean, you can actually experiment with them. You can do all kinds of testing, prototyping, A/B testing. I mean, these are all jargon terms, but pretty straightforward. You can try different things without spending billions of dollars. So new brands are getting born, new concepts are coming into the market, and we are seeing faster growth and lesser capital deployed.
So let me ask a question, and anybody can chime in. So Rasna launched in the mid-80s. Badilal was an exciting ice cream brand. More recently, Patanjali gave a lot of shivers to the FMCG behemoths. Why is this era different?
What has changed, compared to the kind of brands that were created earlier? I think at the fundamental level, the consumer, the new age consumer that we talk about, typically the 40 to 80 million Flipkart shopper, taking a ride on Uber, whatever that number be, but let's say it's tens of millions of users. I think this consumer is very impatient. This consumer is also very entitled. I think the phrase that Kamal was using. he's also or she is also very aware. They are globally connected. The channels of communication into them are also varied. They are very conducive and actually seeking feedback. They read reviews a lot. So I think the number of options from which they are seeking information about the brands or products they consume are very many and very different from what existed before. It could be social media, it could be Pinterest, or whatever it is. It is nothing connected to what existed 10 years back. So that's a very, very tectonic shift that in my mind has happened over the last decade. Also they are very communicative. Not only will they seek feedback, but they'll be also very open to writing feedback about your brand if things go right or wrong, especially if they go wrong. Yeah, so I think that is very, very different, which is why the channels on which these new brands will be different, will be created, will also be a little different. And I think we don't want to go into the creation of how these businesses will unfold over the next few years. But I do feel that definitely the consumer is far, far more different.
Let me just say, whenever we sit in Bangalore or Mumbai, we only talk about people like us. The same 40 million, and maybe I'll turn to Pankaj and then Kushal. You guys have exposures to the non-tier 1 segment of the economy. What about them? And I think if you see one of the most revolutionary FMCG products was the sachet shampoo. Parle Tiger biscuits have been 5 rupees for God knows how many decades. Obviously the weight becomes lower every 3-4 years. So what about the other segments, Pankaj and then Kushal?
So how we look at consumers is you have the urban consumers, like you rightly pointed out, and then we have the rural consumers, right? And there's a theory of social conformity, which is linked to normative consumption, where you want to be accepted by the society, right? You want to be a part of the society that is existing in urban India. That drove behavior leading to purchases of similar items in smaller quantities, and that's what led to the success of brands in smaller sizes or smaller packs. What we notice, and we have exposure to rural consumers, is aspirationally those consumers also want to improve their own lifestyle, the households that they are living in, and that can only happen if those products and services are available in rural India. Financial services is the missing piece. Most households will not have access to loans or other financial means to purchase such services and products. But what we are noticing as a firm is there's a change in the rural economy as well. It's just that we don't have as many lucrative jobs which allow the disposable income to change significantly, right? So if the disposable income does not change significantly, you will still try and consume basic necessities, and you'll try and improve on the basic necessities that are consumed within the rural economy. If you break the consumption pattern down, you have food and beverages. These are basic necessities. The second part, which is the second most important, element of that rural consumption is housing, right? Rural housing and basic household services that these households can get access to. The third part which is linked to the disposable income, which in much varied sense is linked to what kind of jobs are available in the rural economy. India, it's still linked to, it continues to be an agrarian economy, so the disposable income shift is not significant. But aspirationally, yes, the consumer wants to move up. Aspirationally, yes, the consumer does want to trade up.
In the last 7 years, we've seen their aspirations change because information, Aadhaar, hopefully Jio will cause the second round of revolution. And actually, when you look at business models, they're all very focused on delivery via digital, whereas their digital plays a very different role.
Sure. Thanks, Rajiv. Actually, in fact, when the others were speaking, I was about to add, while we see the urban consumers, there's also the real growth is actually happening in the middle and the lower middle segments, where people are migrating from the below the line poverty levels to just above, and their needs are changing. And it's interesting you asked this question right then. Two things is that we have seen in this space broadly. One is on the level of the basic necessities are now being fulfilled for a large part of population that was not being fulfilled earlier, which is roti kapda makan. That problem to a large extent is getting solved for this section of population that is moving from, let's say, less than 10,000 rupees per month income to now 15, 20, 25,000 rupees per month income. And with that problem solved, they are actually moving to the next stage of consumption, which is probably better. So when it comes to food, earlier the consumption was more carbohydrates, but now they are moving to more proteins, more healthy food, more fruits and vegetables, and so on. So there's a change in the consumption pattern over there. If you look at even in terms of services that they aspire to do, and similar to what Pankaj said, that they are now getting a little bit more aspirational after their basic needs have been fulfilled. Healthcare, again, like it is the quality of healthcare that they were looking to get. Earlier they were just visiting the public or the government-run healthcare facilities, but now they're looking to access much better quality healthcare facilities.
I think the consumer expectation, when they can see many new things coming very quickly, and their attention is kind of getting diverted. So, Shashank, from your vantage point, what are the trends you are seeing? And you can take a wide sweep because you are pretty much the plumbing and the frontline enablement for many of these companies.
Post demonetization, IRCTC, which is the biggest ticket engine, booking engine, right? The volumes spiked up significantly. Until this date, it hasn't gone down. So today, 60% of the transactions have happened digitally, and we see significant amount of volumes coming from rural areas, tier 2, tier 3 cities, which was just not visible before. And simply because once people have experienced a low friction way of doing something at the same cost, there is no going back.
What is the macroeconomic issue around incomes? You know, we're living in a very low inflation world. Is this just a shift of value from one segment to the other? Are we adding more to the economy? Is it efficiency? Or if you take the number of panel discussions we have, times the time I've heard billion-dollar companies being created, you know, you'll soon be a $4-5 trillion economy already.
What is happening is, of course, lots of government schemes are also aiding this for inculcating a larger population into consumption. Our Prime Minister rolled out a Pradhan Mantri Ujjwal Yojana. We are a mass brand. We are manufacturers. But if you cannot personalize the experience of sale for every individual customer, you really lose out because there are hundreds of people who will do it for you if you don't do it. Media is evolving. How you consume media is evolving. Content and the way content is looked at is evolving. And for brands, consumer brands, I think, of course, products have to. I think what is established is Indians are now extremely value-seeking in nature, and they understand what value they want to derive of any product and the value they want to sort of remunerate for it. So product quality is non-negotiable. But after that, everything else, I think personalization is extremely important.
Jewelry in India is perhaps as old as kitchen appliances, maybe older. And we've always identified jewelry as somebody whom, my parents or their parents have gone, and that tradition, which I think Titan broke through very nicely. And here you have Gaurav Bluestone creating a whole different category, and the touch and feel, the security and confidence and comfort. How did you get about doing this? And you've been at this for the last 8 years. So what have been your learnings in reaching out to the new consumer?
So in terms of market, it had always been there. It was a highly relationship-driven market for the longest of the times. What started happening around 20-25 years back was that a lot of people started migrating from one city to another. Before that, for generations, people were living in the same city. In fact, with joint families also. So at that time, all the jewelry purchase was actually locked in with the family jewelers within those relationships. But when people started moving in the new cities, there was no family jeweler for them. In fact, it was very difficult for them to force this new relationship with the local jeweler because the whole trust with the family jeweler was actually built on fear that you cannot trust anyone else. So when they moved to new cities, they could not trust the family jeweler there, and that was that window of opportunity that Titan captured very well. So they started in 95, and within, I think, 20-25 years, they are now a $15 billion market cap company. And that is when almost 18% of this market has moved to organized. This shift is accelerating. So in next 5-6 years, almost 40-50% of the market is expected to move to organized jewelers. So what we are seeing is hence that first interaction, first touch point thing, online seems to be doing way better than offline. But
in the category, because the nature of the category, because the touch and feel, etc. If it's supported with offline, that is the right combination, is what we recently observed. But in terms of user behavior and consumer behavior, yes, a lot has changed in the last 20-25 years.
So we talk about 7%, but it doesn't feel like 7%. I think there are many things underway, and you kind of mentioned, and I think one of the biggest things I'm seeing is the diminution of economic profits, conditioned by lower nominal income, lower wage increases, global competitiveness, global excess capacity, and a value shift occasioned by reorganizing traditional businesses like jewelry or appliances which have been around for donkey's years and they've not been able to connect with the customer. It's been a supply-led. And I think this is, for me, a very interesting point, that is the economic profit for the entire country going to enhance, or we're going to see a shift and actually diminution, much like Uber's S1 saying, we never hope to make any profit, And I want to leave it here, and I want to now come back. What does a large company or an established company with an established brand and decades of what Kamal said, established distribution, brand, etc., do to face this new competition?
There is one camp which truly recognizes that, there's a term somebody used in one consulting presentation, the attack of the ants. So these are these, new age brands which are continuously chipping away at the larger players until they start really feeling the pain. And I think several large companies are starting to see that phenomena. I think it got a little masked and continues to be one of the areas where, because the rural economy is growing so fast and because they still have the modes of distribution and reach which the smaller companies don't have, they are not feeling that pain, because at the top they keep losing share and they keep gaining the business at the lower end of the spectrum. So it's an interesting paradigm. There is this desperation to be connected to what is happening in the startup world. Interestingly, our fund, which is a small fund, we have investment from Unilever in the fund, from ITC, from Imami, from Wipro, from Marico. Any consumer company who is concerned about what's happening, the first port of call is, can we work with people who are in the space, who can at least teach us or show us what's going on. Second thing is, they are developing these cells or these units within their companies to try and address this, I think with very limited success, to be honest, because you get just lost in the system. And the third thing which is happening globally, and India is now starting to show very significant traction on that, is significant either investment or acquisition interest of the startup world, so that you can at least try and take on businesses which can be the Dollar Shave Club as a classic example in the US context, and now Beardo and Marico and so many such examples. So I think right now it is a very dynamic environment where nobody really has all the answers. Everybody is trying to figure it out, and some of them are saying, it doesn't concern me, I am growing, I have my rural program in place, and I will see how it shapes up.
Even within the microcosm of just the new age business, and we've just discussed how each of them like a personalized experience, how it's a customer who's very fickle in terms of taste. So any of these businesses, when starting, as long as they've figured out the specific customer demand, they have certain space to grow. Beyond that, you have the regulatory provisions coming in, you have your competitive space getting wider. So what in economic terms we call supernormal profits kind of getting squeezed out. So it's natural for a product and an economic cycle to go through that phase where your supernormal profits are then squeezed, your profit margins get... We've seen that happening in airlines, we've seen that happening in FMCG. So that life cycle, and given that if you're not a big brand, you probably don't have deeper pockets to kind of ride through the waves, and you automatically kind of hit that wall, maybe sometimes too soon, or maybe if you are smart enough to kind of front lead this wave, a little longer shelf life. But how much longer is the shelf life, and where is the tipping point? That's probably a constant question for a business like this that I would be looking at.
Earlier in 2012-13, when we used to ask for meetings with one of these larger corporates or something, it was almost like either they're doing a favor to us by meeting us, or we have to go somewhere, or like it was just very difficult. But now they actually want to meet us to figure out what's happening. That is one. Second is from a very selfish perspective, what we are seeing is that earlier they used to think that they can do anything by themselves. So if you go and pitch a new idea to them or something like that, they say, okay, big deal, but like, yeah, I'll hire 10 people and do it myself. I've got a lot of money. That has changed in a big way. We are seeing that they now realize that really can't do everything by themselves, and these young companies are the ones who can actually move things faster and do things better. And that is leading to good exit options for us. So in the last, and that's why I said on a selfish note, so but in the last 2 quarters, we have actually had 2 successful exits to traditional companies. And that basically shows that now they are believing that you just can't create things yourself. You actually need to acquire companies or startups, and this is great for the industry.
My immediate comparison is China, but you look at what is substantially different. Why is their minimum wages today 5x of India? Which is why India is gaining this sort of threshold into exports, right, or manufacturing for that matter. It's genuinely only because of 2 big aspects. One is lack of infrastructure and lack of logistics.
Does this make the incumbent, still very strong because they've mastered over decades the art of logistics, distribution, managing distributors, and they virtually work like a bank for the distributors? I mean, and therefore, is it daunting, or do you think there is a way out of this?
But it's the same for the traditional companies as well as this new startups that come, right? So I actually talk to a lot of traditional companies in the space, because that's where we get good big business, right? Because it's already established in some sense. So the attitudes that we see, usually the way we see the market evolving and the companies differing compared to each other, right? So for each traditional company, one constant thing that I see is, for the leadership team, first of all, right, whether they are connected to consumers or not. Because what happens as the company grows, as the company grows from 100 to 1,000 to 10,000 people, right, the leadership team itself gets very disconnected from the consumers on the ground. And the consumer trends keep on evolving every 5 years, every 10 years, right? So you have to keep yourselves updated. Otherwise, the traditional things will keep on working fine, but whenever the generational change happens, then you'll be left wanting in some sense, right? And we saw this happening in the airline industry, in the e-commerce industry, for example, right? You already have traditional retail, which has very good infrastructure in some sense, right? But they are not the ones who went and took advantage of internet, and we saw new age companies coming up and establishing an additional parallel infrastructure of warehouse and logistics to take on that challenge.
To also comment about young companies, I mean, and I'm just being very pointed here, that 40-50% of the VC money goes to Google and Facebook. And we talk digital marketing is cheap. Actually, digital marketing is hugely expensive. And there's a plethora of digital marketers using the same data. We're making Google and Facebook richer. I mean, is there a different way to do it?
I think when we did a lot of digital marketing on Facebook and Google, we hit a platform. So we are not able to expand further. So we have taken a call to be at a certain level and then move out and just leave it out. We try and look at a lot of SaaS to help us to target the marketing, to target our consumers. We now have taken a different look at bloggers. That again is indirectly to the digital marketing. So we do a lot of engagement with bloggers like fashion stylists, food stylists. So in this, these bloggers in turn use digital platform and tell the story about Chumba.
The company should not be built only on the back of marketing. I think it's a little different, adjacency to the question you're asking, Rajiv. But if you're having to build your company only on the back of marketing dollar, you should go back to the product and find out that have you yet discovered that real elusive product market fit or the superlative experience that we talk about. If you haven't, we should iterate till such time that we feel confident that we found it. Going back to the point on marketing itself, like Gaurav said, obviously, Google is more sales. I think in many ways the marketing curve for the startup in India has also evolved.
But when you see your investee and your investee company portfolio, what are the things you caution them about? And what do you watch out for?
It's very much linked to the entrepreneur, because each and every entrepreneur has his or her own framework of building a business. From our standpoint, right, unit economics, and it depends on the business that we are in. So, for example, if it's a food and beverage business and operating in, let's say, Bombay, Delhi, and a few other markets, unit economics in Bombay, proving unit economics is essential. There are various ways in which you could prove unit economics. People have to know that you have a product out in the market, and that's why marketing spends are also important. But it cannot be at the cost of a significant burn to the company, right? So what we are always careful about, and what we keep telling our entrepreneurs is, one, if you have the right product, right, or if you have the right service, you need to prove that the service or the product works in the first market that you're entering. It can be any market that you want to target. What we have observed is people get so enamored by sales, GMVs or net sales, that once they start seeing a number grow, they would like to expand into multiple markets, but it adds up to losing a lot of investor money. So some portion of the money also goes into funding Google, Facebook, and the burn rates in these companies, which never comes back, right? So that is a very important condition that we put in each of the businesses and the entrepreneurs that we want to work with. So how do we prove that there's a product? How do we prove there's a market? And how do you substantiate that your gross margin profitable, your EBITDA margin profitable in one of the key cities? Because that is essential for raising the next round, Series B. Then at Series B, you would ideally want to be profitable. It shouldn't be EBITDA break-even. You should prove that the EBITDA is growing, and it can grow for a longer time frame, right? And that would allow you to raise Series C. The longer term strategy, depending on which stage of the business we enter in and how long do we plan to stay with the company, is we have a cost of capital, which is a mix of debt and equity, and investors from the US and Europe are very expensive, like most of the funds would know. So weighted average, the ROC should exceed the cost of capital, and that's where value creation comes from, right? And at least for us as a fund, we observe how the cost of capital for the business is changing. Is it growing? Is it declining? How does it tally with the ROCs? And are we creating value? Because as long as ROC, the return, is higher than the cost, we'll create some value. Now, what is not, and we were having this earlier discussion around profits in business, right? What we've seen is we don't see supernormal profits in businesses in India because it's a very competitive space. Jugaad is very much possible in the Indian economy, where people find new methods and ways to launch a new product or service that competes with an existing product or service. But if we look at businesses outside India, one very good example that I have in mind is Intel. Historically, the return on capital for a business like Intel has been substantially higher than the cost of capital for Intel. Why is that? Because the company has been able to create some inherent brand advantage, some inherent technology advantage, some inherent IP advantage. Early days in India, but that is something that would lead to higher profits, supernormal profits for the businesses.
Amrit, as you manage your business, what are you concerned about? I mean, yours is a little different, but still I'd say that you are susceptible to the vagaries of your end customers and their own funding models.
Yeah, I'll talk about that point, but one point which we have seen, we're a pretty young company, we're just 7 months old. And one thing we do see, it's a very macro commentary, is that India is fundamentally a very supply constrained market also. In terms of, there is, at least in our business, every month we let go of 4 to 5x more demand than we can fulfill, primarily because we don't have the relevant supply. And in fact, we're working with a pretty large automobile company. They've been in business for around 20 years, and more than 20 years. They are looking at, in their R&D team, they're looking at creating new products faster. And we've been trying to find supply for them in India. And then we finally said, okay, let's look at other countries. We looked at China. And then we just did a rough comparison that the Chinese suppliers are 4x faster and 3x cheaper for the same item than any Indian supplier that we could find. Of course, we don't have the entire country mapped out. But that's one thing we definitely see, that we talked about infrastructure. I just moved back from the US last year, and me and my wife, we constantly, we have Uber, but we don't have roads, right? So a lot of, we see, that supply building over the next, decade or so is something we are trying to address. Like, how do we not just work with the existing pool of suppliers, but take them to that next level where they become, world class? And we feel that will also drive a lot of
shift upstream, in terms of how OEMs and other companies react in terms of how they look at product and how they look at other things.
I'll just take the last 5-7 minutes, one line comment starting with Rajni round, and then we'll open up for Q&A for the audience, and then we'll wrap up so we can leave quickly.
I just try to get the big picture together, but I would say watch out for the shelf life. That's something that's very critical for a new age business that we are looking at. Given the current infrastructure and the menu around that we're looking at, it could be as short as 5 to 7 years. So all the euphoria could, or possibly we hit the higher road and go higher.
New product development life cycles are drastically reducing, and all new age businesses should be careful about it. And at the same time, I think there are a lot of brand gaps in the market across products and services that we see in India. So that's an opportunity that most brands or new age businesses should try and fulfill.
I genuinely believe we're a very, very prosperous nation, and it's going to continue to be so for the next couple of decades at least. There is a lot of opportunity, and I know we're all riding on this opportunity, but I see this opportunity somewhere because we're living in the metro cities. We might see some sort of saturation, but I feel if you go down just slightly below to 1 lakh plus towns, which are enormous, we have more than 500 1 lakh plus towns in the country, which are now seeing retail infrastructure of different kinds, offline and online. Just tapping this audience is massive growth in consumption. Then we can go down. Everyone's talking big guns about rural, but I really don't see too many brands making heavy investments in the rural infrastructure, because we all concur on that. So I think that we have a large pipeline ahead of us. So prosperity is going to stay.
Similar to what Neha said, there is a lot of latent demand in the economy at this point of time, which needs to be fulfilled, which is creating a lot of opportunities for companies to come up with more innovative ways of fulfilling that latent demand, and that is where the opportunity lies from where we see. I think the challenge is distribution, and that is something that we have conquered. How do we have the railroads to fulfill and make sure that the people who need the goods get there? So we are building the trains, but do we have the railroads? I think that is something that we need to be careful about, but there is a lot of latent demand that we are trying to fulfill.
We believe that overall consumption as an economy in India is, whatever numbers you see, 4 trillion, 5 trillion, 6 trillion, there are different reports. I think the big question for us is not just the consumption opportunity, because all of us have talked about that. I think it's really the ecosystem which will allow these brands to flourish. Whether it's infrastructure, whether it's go-to-market channel, whether it's disruption in, we haven't talked about things like companies like Udaan, Store King, who are disrupting even distribution in the small towns, rural India. And of course, access to various forms of capital and patient capital, because brands will not get built overnight. So as long as all players in the ecosystem continue to work together and believe that this is the opportunity, I think we will see some really, really interesting new brands coming up.
Very important to be cognizant of what is the income threshold and what is the demography that you are targeting, right? Because for every demography, every threshold, the strategies change, the distribution angles change, right? One thing that is fundamentally constant is that all the people in India should be prospering, right? But that is not equivalent across the country, and that's why you see companies hitting some sort of ceiling, because they don't realize this factor when they started up, right? So for big companies, even for companies who are targeting 50 million or 100 million users, there's still a lot of scope for growth, right? But beyond the 5, 6 years, 7 years life cycle of a company, they need to keep thinking about how to expand that market, because it gets tapped up, right? And that is something that I think now startups in India are starting to realize, after seeing the likes of Flipkart and Ola, that you cannot just sit and in a comfort zone once you have shown growth for a few years, because as you scale up, the challenges don't end, right? And the challenges will keep coming, but there's still a lot of scope for growth in India, but you need to keep thinking about how you are going to tap into it, and leave behind the older strategies and figure out how do you reinvent yourself for the next 100 million or next 500 million.
The fast shift in technology trends will give rise to disproportionate opportunities every once in a while, and that cycle is going to become faster and faster, and we'll have businesses with a very strong tech leverage like Ola, like Book My Show, and there'll be those opportunities that will keep on coming. but that will be a very small sliver of overall businesses. But even for rest of the businesses, the way they should use online, the way they should use technology, they can actually create a lot more efficiency and a lot more leverage in their own business by thinking of the two worlds together and not thinking in silos that okay, this is offline business and this is online business or this is tech business.
For the consumer, a great shift is happening. For the first time, like many of us said, we are seeing the resurgence of the Bharat brand juxtaposed to the Western brand, and therefore, new confidence is emerging in the consumer. कि हम भी बना सकते हैं. This is our product, and we believe in it, which is true for the millennial as well as for the older generation to a certain extent.
So the survival of the company depends on how innovative you are. So at Schumberg, we feel that there is about 35% of repeat customers, and how do we fulfill them? How do we give them new? How do we give them fresh? So we have to constantly innovate our designs, constantly look how adaptable the design can be over the product. So I think innovation at a company has to look at when they want to move forward.
Now, I think even a traditional industry like banking, I think we cannot compete with the significant strength and build out of the brands over the last 25 years. We have to find a new wedging, and some of that is partnerships, some of that is payments, some of that is new economy, which we believe is what's going to define India in the next 10, 20 years. Tier 2 to Tier 4, 5 markets are actually where consumption can grow, albeit from a small base, but you need to find different business models.
I think this is a very interesting opportunity for different components, ecosystem for consumer brands to come together. At Fireside, we are very big believers in the emerging new age brands and how they are going to change how consumption gets triggered in India, especially in all the millennial consumer ecosystem.
As most traditional businesses, and it's unfortunate we call them traditional because any prosperous company has to continue to keep evolving. The day you stop your evolution, you're anyway redundant. So long as you keep continuing to evolve, you keep staying abreast with new trends, you have better nuanced understanding of your consumers, because your consumers are evolving and your consumers are not different people, they are us, they are you and me.
So I think this is going to give you a lot of insight into how the future business for the new age consumer business is going to expand.
So Power Conversation as a platform is a very interesting concept. The whole idea of bringing the whole ecosystem together and getting different perspectives about the same business or same idea and understanding it from different angles kind of completes your understanding of the ecosystem.
Today, one has to look beyond traditional banking. We have to look at engaging further and deeper with the clients, understand what their requirements are, understand what they are seeking from us.